California is actually crazy. They just passed AB 2624, aka the Stop Nick Shirley Act, to make it harder to investigate and expose fraud inside of the state of California. Now this bill, AB 2624, is so bad that just since March 26, they've already created 4 different versions of this bill because of the pushback that they have received, because it is a direct violation of the First Amendment, and quite literally they are trying to shill other people, not just journalists, but anybody inside the state of California, to look into fraud, specifically inside of immigration support services providers. They're trying to make it illegal to expose fraud. And so after making more than 4 different versions of this bill, they voted on it again inside the California State Assembly, and it passed overwhelmingly with 49 votes saying yes. And what's concerning about this is now it will go to the California Senate. And when I actually confronted these people about this bill a few months back, one of the persons who is actually in the Senate in California, his name's like something with Wiener in it. I think it's like Scott Wiener. He even said that I was a psycho scam artist. Can you give us your opinion really quick on AB 2624?
I think you're a psycho scam artist, so...
You think I am? Please disclose how you think that. And so this bill passed, and now it's going to the Senate inside of California. But let's hear what Mia Bonta had to say about this bill, as she's the one who created this. And then we're also going to get into the nitty-gritty and the conflict of interest with Mia Bonta. So let's hear what Mia Bonta had to say about this bill.
AB 2624 we've taken clarifying amendments in order to address feedback from First Amendment organizations.
She knows the bill is so bad that she had to take back feedback from First Amendment organizations because this bill is a direct violation of the First Amendment. And now they try to do different things in this new version of the bill, but if you read it over again, it is still a complete violation of the First Amendment.
So what does AB 2624 do? The Safe at Work Act. It enables California's Safe at Home program to include immigrant service providers, their employees and volunteers. This program, nearly 30 years old, allows participants to use a substitute address designated by the Secretary of State, keeping their home, work, and school addresses out of public records while still allowing them to safely receive mail and legal documents through the state. This gives them a critical layer of protection and privacy in an environment where their personal safety is increasingly at risk. Individuals who provide vital immigrant support services, including legal aid, humanitarian relief, case management, and advocacy, are facing targeted harassment. This is not hypothetical.
Now, what she failed to say right there is it also includes healthcare. So they're trying to protect illegal migrants, immigrants, communities, or anybody who gives services to immigrants. They're trying to protect that information from being public. We know that millions upon millions of dollars of fraud takes place inside of these immigration support services because these politicians use the immigrant communities to commit fraud. And so what Mia Bonta is saying is she's saying that the immigration support services are underneath attack and that all their information needs to be held confidential. But let's break down what she means when she says designated immigration support services. According to her bill right here, it says that designated immigration support services means services provided to the immigrant population, including but not limited to legal representation, legal assistance, advocacy, case management, humanitarian relief, immigration resources, referrals, translation services, counseling services, and healthcare. And they put the word healthcare at the very bottom. They did that very slyly because that's where a lot of the fraud takes place inside of California with their program called Medi-Cal, for instance. The hospice fraud that took place inside the Armenian community, inside of Van Nuys, that was being done by immigrants, and they would essentially be protected underneath this law because they're also providing services to immigrants, and by exposing them, that would then become essentially criminal according to this bill right here. You could face a $4,000 fine, and we're going to get into these revisions they've made as well, because prior it was a $10,000 or $50,000 fine. But because of the public pressure that we put on them, they've now actually eliminated the $10,000 and $50,000, and they've done some new changes with the wording, let's just say that. But let's hear a counter argument from a man who's also a member of the California State Assembly with the last name of DeMaio, who's been a big supporter and who's actually called out this bill, and he's nicknamed it the Stop Nick Shirley Act. Let's hear what he has to say, as this quite literally is such a violation of the First Amendment. He tries to make it very obvious to all the other people inside of the Assembly that this is a violation of the First Amendment, and let's hear what he has to say.
I want my colleagues to at least read the language that we find to be quite offensive and unconstitutional in this bill. This is the Stop Nick Shirley Act in
Mr. DeMaio, unfortunately, I need...
See, they all react as soon as he says the Stop Nick Shirley Act. Everyone inside the Assembly on the Democrat side freaks out.
This is what many are calling the Stop Nick Shirley Act. This provision right here, B1. This is the look, I'm not going to support the bill overall, but at the very least, if you support freedom of speech and the First Amendment, B1 is a problem. And let me quote it in plain English, directly from the bill. A person shall not publicly post or display on the internet the image of a designated immigrant support services provider. That's the language, plain and simple. It goes on to say, well, only if this so-called provider has given a written request. So let me give you an example. Nick Shirley shows up with his camera crew to the Somali Leering Center. Or maybe one of the 90 fake hospices operating in a building in Los Angeles that was highlighted by CBS News. Shows up doing the work of a citizen watchdog journalist. This is something we should promote. We should say, look, we want extra set of eyes. People have a right to go out there and kick the tires and find out what are these organizations doing with our taxpayer funds. Nick Shirley records empty beds at the daycare center, records no patients, no medical supplies, no nurses, no doctors at the fake hospices. On the basis of this research, investigative research, posts this on the internet, interviews some of the providers. And all these people do is they hand Nick Shirley a business card.
Excuse me, Mr. DeMaio. Assemblymember Bonta, you are recognized for your point of order.
I asked the member from San Diego to actually stick to the merits of this bill, which actually has nothing to do with so-called
Thank you,
Nick Shirley.
Assemblymember.
And now Mia Bonta jumps in and she says this has actually nothing to do with Nick Shirley. However, this bill was only created after I had exposed widespread fraud inside the Somali community inside of Minnesota, and then also the Armenian community with the hospices in Los Angeles. So this bill actually has a lot to do with me, because they're now trying to go in and cover up the fraud from being exposed, because if this bill was in place before I filmed those videos, then it would have made it criminal for me to go out and look for fraud inside of the communities like in Van Nuys, where all the hospice fraud was taking place, for instance. So Mia Bonta, this bill actually has a lot to do with me. And with this bill, it also includes nonprofits, in which nonprofits are used by these politicians. These nonprofits receive hundreds of millions of dollars every single year inside of California, and these nonprofits often fuel what these politicians want to do inside of these communities. In fact, one of the people who are behind this bill is called Churla, and Churla has now been exposed for funding and for actually carrying out a lot of the protests that took place last summer inside of California, inside of Los Angeles. And now let's continue with what Carl DeMaio has to say.
If you show up and take video of those providers under this bill, all they would have to do, all the fraudsters would have to do, is hand a business card over to the investigative journalist, and if they posted that evidence that they caught on video on the internet, they would be violating this law. The lawyers in this room know that absolutely, under this language, would be prohibited from being posted to the internet. This is outrageous. And I'm urging you to uphold the First Amendment and to protect the right of citizen journalists like Nick Shirley and others to do the work that they've been doing. And they've been exposing fraud. And this is fraud that taxpayers ought to know about. This is the dollars of taxpayers, and we have an obligation to make sure that the transparency is provided. You can hue and cry all you want, but that's the language. And I just walked you through a real example of what Nick Shirley and other citizen journalists do and how it would be made illegal under this bill. When you vote for this, that's what you're voting to do. You are now put on notice, and then when the controversy continues to increase, that's your responsibility.
So this man stands up to all the rest of the assembly, shout out Carter Mayo, because he's actually speaking truth and he's reading it straight from the bill that Mia Bonta has created. And I also want to remind you guys really quick before we go into the other segments of this video is I want you guys to join Anti-Fraud Club. It's a club that we created. It's called antifraudclub.com. It's essentially a newsletter that we created to be able to track and keep up with all of the fraud that's being exposed here inside the United States. So go ahead and subscribe. It's completely free. There is an option if you do want to become a member that then helps support the team that I've built to go out and expose this fraud, to keep track of all of it. And then we also have hoodies and other stuff available on the site. So go to antifraudclub.com. The link is in the description or in the pinned comment down below. And now let's get back into this bill, the Stop Nick Shirley Act. And so now this lady is going to stand up and she's going to say why she supports the bill. Let's hear what she has to say.
I rise to support Assembly Bill 2624 at a time when immigrant communities across this country are being demonized for political gain. We have the responsibility to protect the people on the front lines who serve those families every single day. These are legal aid workers. These are nonprofit staff. These are translators. These are counselors. These are faith leaders and volunteers helping families navigate impossible circumstances. And because they dare stand with the immigrant communities, they are being unjustly targeted. Their safety is put at a risk by people who believe intimidation is a political strategy. This is not a game. This is not a social media stunt, and we should not legitimize harassment, meaning through campaigns designed to terrorize people out of public service. We are all here doing a public service, aren't we? Do we stand to be terrorized out of our public service? I think not. So let's say the quiet part out loud. Some people are angry that immigrant communities are protected and fighting back against fear-based politics. Let's just call it what it is. So Assembly Bill 2624 draws a clear line, and we will protect our immigrant communities and their advocates. And with that, I respectfully ask for and I vote for Assembly Bill 2624.
So this lady gives her case why she wants this bill to get passed, and the bill does eventually get passed. And the reason why people are so upset about these immigration support services is because it's been well known that there's millions and millions of dollars of fraud that's taking place. And so these politicians are actually using these immigrant communities to commit fraud. Nobody wants to go after immigrants. We all believe and we all want our tax dollars being funded back to America, but we don't want it being funded and given to people who came into this country illegally. And that's what these people are supporting, and that's how the fraud's been able to go on for so long, because they actually use immigrant communities to commit fraud. That's what people don't understand. I've seen it firsthand for the past few years now, that the politicians use the immigrants to commit the fraud, to continue to funnel and fund whatever they need to get done inside the state of California, whether that's through campaigns, with the donations that come through, or with the agendas they want to push inside of their communities. And now Assemblyman David J. Topinga is going to talk about why he does not support AB 2624, and let's see what he has to say.
This bill is a Trojan horse using a good program to add bad safeguards for what a lot of people in not only the state of California, but across the United States is seeing today that is one of their #1 issues: fraud and corruption, and the weaponization of what's happened in our government, especially when it includes nonprofits, non-governmental organizations, and what they're doing with our money. As we say, we're using this bill in an attempt to protect immigration support services. In the bill itself, the definition, as I read it to you verbatim, designated immigration support services means services provided to the immigrant population, including, but not limited to, legal representation, legal assistance, advocacy, case management, humanitarian relief, immigration support, referrals. But the definition of what a designated immigration support service provider is expanded beyond just employees and volunteers. It includes nonprofit organizations with no limitations. It includes any facility deemed to be protected by the Attorney General. That is what makes this bill different. The broadening of the definitions. But not only that, in the Safe at Home program as well, they do not include posting online. It is a verifiable fact that we have fraud in our system, that they have identified in multiple organizations across the entire state of California. We alone, on 3 cases, found over $250 million in fraud. Where people have
Mr.
been...
Tangipa, we need to stay strictly to the merits of the legislation and not on a broader conversation.
Notice how when they start talking about fraud being exposed, the Democrats inside of this assembly freak out and they try to actually stop them from talking about why people are opposed to this bill.
This talks about posting, and that is...
If you're talking about posting, let's talk about posting.
Yes.
That's very different than what you were just talking about. Let's stay to the merits of this bill, please.
Well, again, in the merits of the bill, when it comes to talking about posting these facilities, if you read the definition itself, it looks like we're adding safeguards to cover up. Instead of going after fraud, corruption, we are going after the ability to post that online. And again, as we read it, designated immigration support services as a definition means a facility where immigration support services are provided, including, but not limited to nonprofit organizational offices, Department of Justice recognized entities, community legal clinics, law offices, accredited representative sites that provide immigration legal services. It is such a broad definition. This is a Trojan horse for an issue that a lot of Americans and Californians especially care about. They want us to find the problems, not add protections for bad actors. I respectfully ask for a no vote.
And so that's the big problem with this bill, is they're trying to make it illegal and they're trying to go after your First Amendment right to post publicly on the internet or anywhere where you want. Just the fact that potentially something might be happening, but because it's an immigration support provider, that will then make it illegal. So 49 people voted yes, and only 19 people voted no, and now this bill is going to be headed to the California Senate, and from there they're going to go and vote. And so what's super concerning about this bill to me is it quite literally is a direct violation on the First Amendment, and Mia Bonta even acknowledges that when she first gets up to talk about this bill. She says because of First Amendment organizations, we've made some amendments to this bill, and now we have some changes, but all they did was change some wording inside this new amendment, and yet it is still a complete violation of the First Amendment. Let me just read you a few of the examples here from the bill. And so the most obvious case here is the one that they already said during that session, but I'll read it again. It says, a person, business, or association shall not publicly post or publicly display, disclose, or distribute on the internet the personal information or image of a designated immigration support service provider. And then it goes on to say, a written demand made under this paragraph shall include a statement declaring that the individual is subject to the protection of this section and describing a reasonable fear for the safety of that individual or any person residing at the individual's home address based on the violation of the subdivision. So they're basically saying that if you go out and you go expose a location for committing fraud, potential alleged fraud, let's just say it's alleged fraud, and then that person says, well, hey, if you film that video, that's going to cause a reasonable fear to me and to our business. So I'm actually going to give you this piece of paper and I'm going to sign it. And so that means that you cannot post this video publicly. And if you do post this video publicly, you're then going to have to go to court and you might have to pay a $4,000 civil fine. And you're also going to have to pay back our attorney fees when we then take you to court for exposing our fraud. And so let's take the hospice fraud, for example, inside of California, because it's being committed by immigrant communities, the Armenians, and they could be providing services to immigrants with their hospice care that they're then providing to, let's say, an immigrant. So let's say you go to Miracle Hospice inside of California. You go there and there's actually nobody there. And while you're exposing the hospice that doesn't exist, somebody inside the building who also owns a hospice comes out and says, hey, you cannot be filming this property because we also own a hospice here and we provide service to immigrants. and then they give you a piece of paper that says, hey, you cannot post that video publicly, then you can actually not post that video publicly. So let's say, theoretically, that happened when I was filming my hospice video, because there was a hospice called Miracle Hospice that had absolutely nobody there, and then a man came out screaming and shouting at us for exposing all of the other ghost hospices. If that man then gave me a piece of paper and said, hey, you cannot post that video because my hospice is also here, you cannot then post that video. They're trying to make it illegal and criminal to go after those that expose fraud. While we should be celebrating people who expose fraud, California right now is actively trying to make it harder for fraud to be exposed. And what makes this bill so crazy is that when I went down to California to confront those people that created this bill, they had absolutely no idea about this bill, or at least they acted like they had no idea. I asked them just plain simple facts about this bill, and they could not even give any responses to the bill. In fact, each and every single one of them that were the co-authors of this bill lied straight to my face and ran inside a door where I could not enter. What makes this bill super crazy is that the Attorney General's wife is actually Mia Bonta. So you have the Attorney General, whose job is to expose and prosecute and find fraud. His name is Rob Bonta. And then you have his wife, Mia Bonta, who is actively right now creating this bill that has just got passed now to the Senate of California. And luckily I was able to expose this bill right when it started, because initially what this bill said is they were going to give out $10,000 fines with up to 1 year jail time, and then also if it was a felony, they were going to give you a $50,000 fine. And they've now dropped that from the wording, and now it just says any provision of the law. However, till this day right now, you do face civil liability if you were to then expose fraud, and then the fraudster said, hey, we actually gave you a piece of paper that said you couldn't expose the fraud that we were committing. So you'd actually have to have, right now, if this bill gets passed into law, you'd have treble actual damages and a minimum of a $4,000 court cost, and then you'd also have to pay the attorney fees, which is crazy. So right now you currently have the largest state in America trying to make it harder for fraud to be exposed by passing this bill, AB 2624, aka the Stop Nick Shirley Act. Remember, if you want to support my work, go to antifraudclub.com, subscribe to the newsletter, completely free, and then it also has hoodies and tees available as well. Thank you all so very much, and we'll see what happens next with this bill, and you guys know I'll be on top of it. So subscribe, and we'll see you guys next video.